Should we mention the random? Well, not random, but just the thing that then happens to them.
The snakes. It's like, what? Hello everybody, welcome back to Boys on Film, where we cast our critical eyes over the latest movies on offer, whether it be in the cinema or on TV. You can actually stream the film we're talking about today on Shudder. It's available there. It's the new movie from horror legend, horror icon, Dario Argento. Paul is here for Boys on Film. Are you a fan of Argento?
Probably wouldn't say I'm enough of an expert to say, oh, I'm a fan, but I definitely, there's lots of his films that I like, and I kind of think he's one of those people that's made several, yes, of course.
But is Dark Glasses fun? This is the new film that he's released. He was actually acting in a film, the Gaspar Noé film just recently called Vortex. Have you seen that yet?
No.
Yeah, he's not widely known as an actor, but apparently he was really good in that. I've got to see that. But anyway, this is Dark Glasses, directed by Dario Argento, written by him and Franco Ferrini. It stars Ilenia Pastorelli. I'm probably going to get the pronunciation wrong of these. Asia Argento, who's the daughter of Dario, and Andrea Zhang. It all centres on Diana, a young woman who loses her sight. She's looking at the eclipse of the sun and obviously wearing dark glasses, which begins as a bit of an omen, really. It's a bit of a curse for the rest of the film. But she's in a car accident, finds a guide in a Chinese boy called Chin. Together they track down a dangerous killer who seems to be stalking sex workers, which for me instantly I just thought, wow, we're going back there, we're going back to the 70s and 80s with the story revolving around sex workers who get bumped off. I thought that was quite an old-fashioned plot.
Yeah, I mean, it was always, that whole, slasher with hookers and whatever is sort of quite a trope and just feels a bit easy, really.
Yeah.
And I think as you would expect there to be something more to it if that was what the subject was and that's who the victims were, and I'm not sure this film, there's much more to it than that.
Asia Argento plays Rita, who's a carer for visually impaired people, who becomes Diana's friend. I mean, the film overall, it does feature his trademarks. You've got that brilliant kind of 80s synth score, which of course we've heard before with his movies. I know it's not really on the Goblin scale of things. It wasn't that great, but it's got that, and it's got his kind of quite schlocky gore moments as well. I mean, the gore moments I thought were quite tame compared to some of the gore in his previous films, but it didn't really push the limits for me. It wasn't that extreme. It wasn't, because a lot of his films, and I'm probably going to get hate from Argento fans, but a lot of his films are quite schlocky. I think deliberately so.
Yeah, that whole that Italo horror where they were just churning them out. That's very much part of it, really, and I think schlock's not such a bad thing. Schlock. I'm a schlock jock. But weirdly in this, it seems like there's a handful of moments of very, very close-up gore, in particular scene near the end, which I would say features a lot of viscera. I don't know whether this film, whether there's some budgetary requirements that kind of very close-up horror of a particular part of the body being mutilated is cheaper than something bigger. I guess the opening murder is quite gory and quite disturbing, which I guess sets a tone, and then you've already had this kind of eerie eclipse thing before. So I think it sort of sets a scene for something a lot more interesting than it becomes, because it kind of ends up being a kind of person in peril with a sidekick being chased.
Obviously, she's in a car accident, which is how she loses her sight permanently. And hopefully that's not a plot spoiler. I don't think it is, because it's in the premise. But it just seemed a bit shoehorned. It's like, oh, these are the visuals we want. We want the eclipse of the sun. We want the dark glasses, obviously, because that's the title of the movie. It just didn't seem to make any sense to me.
I mean, she's not just in an accident. The reason she's in an accident is she's being chased by a killer who's trying to kill her, and that's how the accident happened. You would think there's maybe a link to the eclipse and then the perpetrator and why the crimes are happening. And actually, that's probably one of the things that I struggle with most is the sort of denouement and the mystery of who the sort of stalker, serial killer, antagonist character is. It doesn't seem like much thought's gone into that at all. It's not surprising when there's the reveal, but it's also not very interesting at all.
Because the third act, you've got this kind of almost detective element where Diana and Chin, they're looking for the serial killer, but there's some really strange scenes. I mean, strange in a bad way. I quite like, I like strange, especially in horror films. But you've got the men who meet Diana because she's a sex worker. There's one guy that smells of dogs, and you've got another guy who wants to fist her.
Yeah.
And she, at the beginning of the film, she seems quite able to look after herself. She's quite confident and independent and doesn't take any crap from anybody, particularly the men, obviously, that she meets.
Yeah.
But as the movie rumbles on, we kind of see her losing that. And it's nothing really to do with her losing her sight, because she seems quite, able to deal with the challenges that obviously her life has changed since having to adapt.
Adapt very well. Which
but she loses that spikiness. She seems a bit, I don't know, it just all fades away.
The sort of final part, or leading up to the finale, is a bit of a sort of damsel in distress with a little kid sidekick running along. And obviously there's an extended sort of like running through the wilderness, being chased or not chased, which, should we mention the random, well, not random, but just the thing that then happens to them?
The snakes. It's like, what? Because when that happened, I eye rolled, but I laughed as well. It's like, okay, so there is some comedy in the movie because there are some comedic elements. I mean, like the men that she mentioned, that I found quite funny because it was quite ridiculous. I mean, the fisting thing was like, where did that come from? Whose brain thought of that? It was obviously Dario's.
But then there's suddenly they're running through the sort of forest, and suddenly they're in some sort of marshy water, and then suddenly there's loads of water snakes, and there's a kind of extended underwater being attacked by water snake sequence, which, again, weirdly, that level of detail and close-up of stuff that's been happening just isn't there very much. So again, is it a bit like someone said, oh, you know what, I've got a tank of snakes that I want you to film, and I'll give you a few £1,000 to be a producer of the film or something?
I think that's exactly what it is. I think somebody, obviously, in brainstorming, in the production meeting, has said, right, we've got to think of the really scary things that could happen to somebody. And obviously losing your sight that ramps up the tension, the anxiety, because we've seen that before with films like Don't Breathe and Wait Until Dark with Audrey Hepburn, years back, and Dancer in the Dark, not a horror film, but obviously that does make you feel quite tense in the Björk film, Lars von Trier. But I don't know, it just seems like, it was all these things that they've just randomly put together to make a horror film, but it doesn't cohesively work. It didn't for me, anyway.
On reflection, just as you've said that, it's made me think that, I'm quite scared of snakes. It's sort of like I just don't like to move, and it's just like that. And actually, if you're thinking about it in terms of if you've lost your sight and then your main senses, one of the main senses is then touch, like water snakes is probably one of the most traumatic things, because you're in a medium that's not your normal medium anyway, water, and then you're being attacked by something that has the most tricky kind of movement patterns. And so actually, maybe originally there was meant to be more stuff that was kind of like sensory assault if you can't see kind of thing. I'm just thinking that out loud, thinking about why that scene may have been in there. I don't think it works like that, but
No. Well, no, exactly, because I didn't feel tension. I didn't feel scared by any of it. I laughed more than I was frightened, which I like that. I like comedy and horror films. I don't know whether that was intentional. I think it might have been. I think Dario maybe was having a bit of fun with it and didn't take it seriously enough. I don't know, but I think I've always got that impression that he has found it fun to play around with the genre a little bit.
It does that then seem to sort of pile on the kind of like put upon heroine victim. Okay, she's a sex worker, now she's lost her sight, now this has happened to her, now this has happened to her, and it's kind of like a bit relentless, really. And I don't think the character then triumphs enough in a, it's interesting you mentioned Dancer in the Dark, because I'm really real fan of Lars von Trier films, and that when that film came out, there's a sequence of films about kind of heroines who suffer greatly because they really believe in something, even though that belief is misguided. And then one of his films, Dogville, kind of has the sort of like revenge moment that feels like the heroine turning the tables for all those other films. But with this, it doesn't feel like they do the character justice to be what she kind of goes through.
Absolutely. I thought in that respect, it felt quite tired. It felt dated to me. I mean, it seemed like it had all the elements of some of his films from the 70s and 80s. Maybe that's what he was doing. He was trying to please his fans of that period, because I know his recent films haven't been well received with the critics. I haven't seen his recent last couple of films. I know there's one called Giallo, which came out, which was panned. So maybe he's trying to revert back to what was successful before.
Yeah, and I think that's, I think there's that thing about, aiming for a more B-movie type thing, and I think actually there's nothing wrong with that, but I do think maybe it's one of the perils of modern filmmaking that because of financing and whatever, I don't know, it just for me it felt very disjointed in terms of sort of approach, and there wasn't really anything artful about it. He's done lots of amazing stuff and shown that he's can do quite arty stuff alongside more mainstream schlocky stuff, and he's a bit of a master of all of that. Whereas, and with this, it just feels like actually maybe the sort of theme around the blindness and the fact it's called Dark Glasses, obviously, and the poster, the focus is the character not being able to see, and it just doesn't seem like anything is explored in that. And I don't want to speak about things I don't know a lot about, but it did seem like I'd be interested to know someone who's worked with people who are blind or partially sighted, that there seemed to be a lot of things that seemed really unrealistic. I mean, I think there were some things about the rehabilitation and the kind of like using clicks and walking and crossing the road, but then there was a thing where it seemed like a guide dog is also then an attack dog. I don't think those like lovely Labradors that you're putting your little pennies into the little model dog at the newsagents. I don't think they're trained to kind of be attack dogs as well. That just felt a bit
exactly
odd.
Yeah, and yeah, I totally agree. I never thought of that actually when watching it. I wasn't really thinking of that. I was thinking of other things, but it didn't seem. I hate to say it, but it just didn't seem like a very smart movie to me at all. No. And I didn't particularly rate the acting either. It felt very clunky to me. And
I felt like the role that his daughter had was quite a thankless role, really. Because she's a director herself, isn't she? And it just felt a bit like, you would think, it would almost be like, it would be a bit more of an extended cameo of quite a fun part, which quite often when they have the credits and it says da 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 da, and it's often a bit of a more campy role or something that people can get their teeth stuck into, and it was actually a kind of just standard supporting role, really.
And the ending as well. Obviously, we're not going to talk about the ending at all or in detail, but the ending, it just left me feeling so flat. I was so looking forward to seeing this film, and I wouldn't say I hated it. It's not like going to be my worst film of the year or anything, I don't think. When the credits rolled, I just thought, what was the point of that?
I mean, we all know in horror films, quite often the setup's really good, and then when it unfolds, that's when it falls apart. Because definitely with this, it's like there's nothing interesting about the reveal of who her attacker is.
No, I mean, I started off quite enjoying it, felt quite compelled at the beginning because it was quite interesting, but then that third act and what happens with the whole detective element, for me it completely fell apart then, and I lost caring. I gave up. So I'm predicting quite a low score from you. I mean, it's a low score. It's a 2 stars for me.
Same for me, 2 stars. Yeah,
I suppose if you're a Dario Argento fan, you might want to check it out of curiosity, like I wanted to.
And there might be, and for someone who's a big Dario Argento fan, there might be all sorts of like Easter eggs and little things in there and stuff. Again, I doubt it, because there just doesn't seem that sense of either artistry or kind of fun to it. There could have been a much more stylized, more knowing, slightly maybe more camp and kind of like celebratory way of making this film, and it's just a bit flat, I think. The one thing I did quite like, there's quite a funny maid in it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, watch for the maid.
Watch it for the maid, the blatantly rude maid.
Well, let us know if you have seen it. It's on Shudder, so you can stream it. Let us know if you're watching any other horror films, because it's Halloween season. I mean, we've talked about quite a lot already. We've got many to come, because we're really enjoying the stuff that's on Shudder, and there are loads of, you know, great films and TV shows that we have reviewed already. So check out the playlist that's on the screen now. Thank you, Paul, as always. Always a pleasure, never a chore. Happy Halloween, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.